good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve, and wishing you a very pleasant evening, and welcome back to my channel. And a great shout out to any new visitors this evening, and please sit down, grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a beverage of your choice, and let's talk about Italy. Okay, what's going on right now in Italy is a storm that could rock the EU and shake it to its very foundations. Now, as we all know, Matteo Slavini is just absolutely a rock star in Italy right now. There's nothing that he can do wrong. The people love him. The Lega Party has stormed the EU elections for the members of the European Parliament. The Lega Party has stormed the EU elections for MEPs, that's members of European Parliament, which have just taken place. But there are troubles at home for Matteo Slavini, and the way that these troubles are going to be solved could have a great effect on the entire EU. So firstly, the economy is very, very sluggish. They're predicting a recession in Italy in 2019, and of course this is because much of the manufacturing has left Italy and gone to Southeast Asia and China. So a lot of good paying jobs, this is a story we've been telling over and over again, have been lost to outsourcing, and so there is high unemployment. Regular unemployment is about 10%, but youth unemployment is running at 31%, and this is basically, well, to put it into some kind of perspective, the unemployment rate during the Great Depression in the 30s never exceeded 24%, and actually once they got into the 1930s fell off to 10%. Now we think of that as a very, very difficult time in history, and that is the kind of unemployment rate that Italy is running right now. And you know, these young people, this is your next generation. Okay, these are the people who are going to be supporting us in our old age, who are the consumers, they are the economy, and if they're not earning, they are basically becoming disenfranchised for the entire system. And of course, you know, one of the things that people want to do when they're young is to get married and have a family. And when you can't support a family because you can't find a job, or the pay that you're receiving is not high enough to be able to even embark on that trip into parenthood, you know, this is very, very, very discouraging. And to have 30% of your youth population basically walking around angry and moving into adulthood as angry people, angry at the government, angry at the system, because their dreams have been shattered. You know, this is we really take too lightly the whole psychological aspect of not having a job and not being able to support yourself adequately to have that kind of independence. And of course, when you have high unemployment, you have people with plenty of time on their hands to sit down and figure out whose fault it is and who it is to blame for their predicament. Italy is also facing a huge banking crisis. Many of their banks are basically debt-laden. They invested in extremely risky bets, thinking that the future was never going to end and that we were always going to be in a bull market. And of course, you know, when you look at any chart, you find that we go from, you know, bull to bear all the time. You know, maybe the time scales maybe change, but you know, it's unavoidable that things go up and down. So Matteo Slavini's response to this has been two basic responses, or no, I should say three basic responses. And the first has been to talk of seizing the gold by the government and holding it by the government. And there are fears that if he does this, this could be used as collateral on raising more money to try and, you know, bail itself out. The other thing that he's trying to do is, well, he's told Mario Draghi that he may just continue to run up the debt and to send a bill to Mario Draghi of the European Central Bank. Now, really, you know, what the problem is here, and you know, Greece went through the same thing, you know, historically, is that when they got themselves into trouble or when things slowed down, basically they inflated their currency, dropped the value slightly, and that gave them more money to spread around to, create infrastructure projects and so on and so forth, and basically keep things rolling along until the economy picked back up again. And this worked pretty successfully, more or less. Obviously this is not a great way to do business, but basically it gave them some flexibility that they wouldn't otherwise have had. Well, once they got into the EU and they went to a single currency, basically governed by the European Central Bank, they no longer had that flexibility. And so the real cracks in the system started to show up, and the same thing happened with Greece. And so now they're in all kinds of trouble with debt, and of course, like everywhere else in the world, because I believe sloppy management, the infrastructure is falling apart in Italy. There are bridges collapsing, and that may only be one bridge, but it's a reflection of the condition of the entire infrastructure. So the third thing that Matteo Slavini is doing is getting into bed with China with the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is a massive infrastructure infusion by China into countries that want to sign up for this. China is essentially trying to create a new Silk Road by land and a sea Silk Road to circumnavigate the world and open up as many trade routes and trading partners as it could along the way. And so the downside, of course, with this is that, well, when China's investing all kinds of money, for example, they're going to help with the revitalization, but they're taking over communications, airports, energy delivery, this kind of stuff. I believe they're going to revamp a port down in Trieste, which is where all of the refugees have been coming in. And so, yes, they're going to seize quite a big part of Italy's infrastructure, and at least control over it through all kinds of money that will be owed. This won't be a gift. There will be all kinds of payback required for the money that is set up for Italy right now. And of course, a big sticking point will be Huawei and 5G and the rollout of that particular program, because basically the EU is boycotting. Britain has said there is really big security problems with 5G, so is America, and so Donald Trump, America, is not very pleased with the idea of Italy getting into bed with China on this issue. And of course, as we'll see in the clips, Greece has done the same thing. Of course, well, they were in a state of virtual capitulation anyways, and so everything was on the block. They had to lower their debt, and so they sold off their infrastructure. And really, this is what you see happens when countries get into trouble. Anyway, let's flip over to the articles that I found, and we'll zoom through those, and we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap-up. Okay, here we go. And this from Fortune: Italy is threatening to repeat the Greek debt crisis, but with higher stakes. The Eurozone's chronic and potentially fatal weakness is about to be exposed again. The populist coalition in Italy is on a collision course with the European Union as the former de facto leader Matteo Slavini looks to build on his victory in European parliamentary elections this weekend by overthrowing the spending rules that the Eurozone has adopted after a debt crisis nearly tore it apart 10 years ago. Salvini also called for a radical new mandate for the European Central Bank that would force it to underwrite Italy's swelling national debt. The development is important because it's a brash, aggressive challenge to the EU's authority, akin to the UK's Brexit vote or the moves by Poland or Hungary to limit the independence of the judiciary. However, in contrast to those acts of defiance, this one comes from one of its founding members, one that, unlike the UK or Hungary, has always seen itself as part of an indivisible core of modern Europe. In essence, Salvini is setting Italy up for a rerun of the Greek debt crisis by asserting Italy's right to spend freely, even though, like any Eurozone member, it doesn't have the right to print money to pay its debts. Italy's high and rising debt level makes it acutely vulnerable to any upward turn in interest rates or any loss of access to capital markets. That means it's a plausible candidate for default, just as Greece was. Only this time the stakes are higher. With over 60 million people, Italy represents 18% of the Eurozone's population, some 16% of its gross domestic product. Its €2.3 trillion sovereign debt pile is the third biggest in the world after US's and Japan's, 10 times larger than the Greek one was. Even as a proportion of gross domestic product, Italy's debts are higher now, at over 132% than Greece's were before its crisis erupted. And even though foreigners hold only a quarter of that debt, according to the Bank of Italy data, Italy's economy is heavily interlinked with the rest of Europe's, especially France's. Voice of Europe, Salvini considered seizing control of Italy's gold reserves. Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Slavini shocked banksters in Brussels and Rome after he floated the idea of seizing the enormous gold reserves from the Bank of Italy, the country's central bank. According to the Financial Times, in a comment given to Italian reporters, Salvini stated that the gold is the property of the Italian people, not of anyone else. And how true that is, but it's what you do with that gold, Matteo. Again from Fortune, Italy is heading for recession in 2019. Here's why. Italy's manufacturing sector shrank for a third straight month in the latest sign that Europe's third largest economy is on the brink of yet another recession. The country was rocked in 2018 by the populist government's heavy spending plans, which sparked a spat with the European Union and pushed up bond yields. The standoff was resolved at the final hour, but unease remains amid a euro area economic slowdown, less monetary support from the European Central Bank, and US-led protectionism. Italy's poor performance in December and the first contraction in French manufacturing since 2016 amid protests by the so-called Yellow Vests weighed on momentum in the euro area. The PMI for the region declined to its lowest in just over 4 years, with business confidence reaching its worst since 2012. Trending economics. The youth unemployment rate in Italy increased to 31.4% in April from 30.6% in March of 2019. Youth unemployment rate in Italy averaged 28.89% from 1983 until 2019, reaching an all-time high of 43.4% in March of 2014 and a record low of 19.4% in February 2007. South China Morning Post. Debt-laden Italy eyes China's Belt and Road, risking more than just the wrath of Donald Trump and the EU. It's clear why Italy, in need of an economic jumpstart, would warm to China, but just as clear why engaging China bilaterally is not a good idea. Is this a misstep for Italy? Is China's Belt and Road Initiative, as Italian Finance Minister Giovanni Tria says, a train that Italy cannot afford to miss? Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte also thinks Italy should jump on board, saying the multi-billion-dollar Chinese infrastructure plan is an opportunity for the country. This will pave the way for Chinese investment in Italy's infrastructure, energy, aviation and telecommunications sectors, but joining the initiative carries serious risks for Italy and will probably also damage its relations with European Union and United States. And of course, here we are, the financial trap. Moreover, a partnership with China could attract the additional capital inflows that Italy sorely needs, given constrained lending by its banks. Where Italy has received about 14 billion euros in Chinese investment since 2000, Chinese firms invested 10 billion euros in 55 Belt and Road countries in the first 10 months of 2018 alone, and have signed contracts for Belt and Road projects worth more than 80 billion US dollars. And this is a report by the Council on Foreign Relations, China's massive Belt and Road Initiative. China's Belt and Road Initiative is the most ambitious infrastructure investment effort in history, but is it also a plan to remake the global balance of power? In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the launch of both the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, infrastructure development and investment initiatives that would stretch from East Asia to Europe. The project, eventually termed the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, but sometimes known as the New Silk Road, is one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever conceived. It harkens back to the original Silk Road, which connected Europe to Asia centuries ago, enriching traders from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Some analysts see the project as an unsettling extension of China's rising power, and as the costs of many of the proposed projects have skyrocketed, opposition has grown in some participant countries. Meanwhile, the United States shares the concern of some in Asia that the BRI could be a Trojan horse for China-led regional development, military expansion, and Beijing-controlled institution. Under President Donald J. Trump, Washington has raised alarm over Beijing's actions, and even as it has abandoned some US efforts to isolate China and deepen its own ties with economic partners in the region. And here is the proposed land and sea corridors of the Belt and Road Initiative. The red is the land, of course, and the blue is the sea route. And of course this is assuming that the Arctic is going to be ice-free the majority of the time. But yes, that is a pretty ambitious loop there. And here's another report from the Council on Foreign Relations. China's Belt and Road get a win in Italy. What was agreed to? In total, Chinese investors signed 29 separate deals amounting to $2.8 billion worth of projects. Most notably, they agreed to invest in port infrastructure in Trieste, Genoa and Palermo, which could give Chinese goods faster access to Europe. Italy's signature marks a turning point. It is the first Group of Seven nation and the largest EU member to accept BRI funds. And here we are from the local. Thousands of Italian bridges will be in crisis in the next 20 years. The next 20 years could be critical for Italian bridges built out of concrete in the post-war period, experts tell the local. The collapse of the Morandi Bridge in Genoa raises questions about the prospects of Italy's more than 1 million bridges built out of concrete. Italian newspapers have highlighted that 300 major bridges could be at risk of collapse, but an expert who inspects bridges and public infrastructure across the country says those numbers are far too conservative. And here from the Nikkei Asian Review, China's Greek investment is making waves in the Aegean. Piraeus, Greece. China is pouring money into Greece's infrastructure sector, viewing the cash-strapped country as a strategic gateway to Europe. From the Greek government's perspective, the Chinese investment offers hope for keeping the economy afloat. The European Union, though, is increasingly alarmed at Beijing's growing influence. About 10 kilometers southwest of Athens, the flags of China and Greece flutter outside the headquarters of the Piraeus Port Authority. Some 16 million passengers pass through the port, the country's largest each year. China COSCO Shipping, China's largest shipping company, in April 2016 agreed to purchase a 67% stake in the port operator from the Greek government. And this also goes for railroads, hydro production, energy, you name it. China has bought it up. Now I know this is a little bit long, so I will make it a quick wrap up. But you know what we're seeing here is a cautionary tale. Okay, these countries, every country in the world, essentially, well, there are some exceptions, but certainly in the Western world, with central banks, operate the same way. And they're all in debt trouble right now. They all have the same problems that Italy has with infrastructure issues and so on and so forth, an aging population, a diminishing workforce, a lower tax rate. The problems will seem insurmountable to try and resolve all of this. But it's a cautionary tale. This is what happens, and we're getting to see ahead of time. Because here in the province in which I reside, Ontario, you know, we owe $340 billion. It is the largest non-sovereign debt in the world, and no one yet has given me a satisfactory explanation as to how or who is going to pay this debt off. So could we be looking at Greece or Italy? And of course, if Italy goes down, Italy's economy is 10 times the size of Greece. It's basically right up there with France and Germany. Okay, so this really would shake the EU to the core. So what this essentially means for the EU is more fracturing, more arguing, And that's the last thing they need with Brexit on the doorstep, and of course the Brexit party winning the majority of seats for the MAP. Brussels is going to find itself basically bogged down for this next 4 years. So they better hope that Britain leaves and all of those Brexiteers get the hell out of Brussels, as Nigel Farage said. But one thing is absolutely for sure: debt makes for strange bedfellows, and so take this cautionary tale and be very careful how you manage debt. Now, how this will actually play out, no one I think is really certain. I believe we're in uncharted territory here, but I can assure you that what does happen will lead to lasting changes in the way we do business. Okay, well, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below, and please share. The way YouTube's algorithm has changed now, my video is not being posted as far and as wide as it used to be, so please do share this video if you can. And in the meantime, this is Houndlock Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we shall talk very, very shortly. Okay, see you now. Bye.